Now, I have a question which I would like to ask, which is talking around which or what percentage of the roles that you fill today are difficult to fill. Whilst we're doing that, it did remind me of another sort of incident. About 20 years ago, I was HR director for part of Fidelity Investments, the big US investment company. And I was head of HR for their European brokerage business. And we needed a head of compliance. And we went out to a big search firm, and they spent 3 months looking, and they didn't come up with anyone. And I thought,
tell them to actually use it.
okay, oh yeah, you need to press the buttons. So there we go, 1 to 5. You know, if you've got none of your roles are hard to fill, it's 1. We won't believe you. Up to 20%, and then you can see how it works. So use your, press your buttons now, please. Or they flash red when they're ready to be pressed. So the compliance role was, we put it out to a big search firm. They didn't come up with anyone. We put it out to a sort of mid-level search firm. They didn't come up with anyone. And the president of the company would walk past my office on a regular basis and kind of point at the empty chair, kind of saying, you know, where the compliance person should be. And after a few months, he stopped sort of doing this, and it was more of a jab and a scowl. And after 6 months, we got a letter from the regulator saying, if you don't find a head of compliance, we're going to shut you down. So this became a real kind of career-limiting issue for me, you know, to find a head of compliance for, you know, what should have been quite an interesting role. And eventually we found a kind of niche headhunting firm that specialized in compliance people, and we got the head of compliance in, and I kept my job just about. But it was a real sort of lesson in the challenges sometimes in finding those difficult to fill jobs. I was hoping we'd have the answers by now. Oh, there we go. Actually, that's worse than I thought. So no one over 80, but actually between 50 and 80% of your jobs are kind of difficult to fill. So it kind of brings me on to the other comment that I wanted to make about Kevin's presentation. He talked about, you know, good times being back for recruiters. Well, you know, great for them. I think for the in-house community, life is a lot more challenging, and you know, a kind of vibrant and growing economy that leads to you know, huge amounts of increases in employment actually makes your job an awful lot harder. And I want to talk about some of the aspects of that. I'm going to talk, of course, about crowdsourcing and the job post, and then some trends in 2014 and beyond. But the kind of in-house headaches, I mean, the demand for specialist and business-critical talents, you know, continues to rise. You know, the talent shortage categories have gone from 3 to 47, according to our REC, and are going to continue to grow. So, you know, from an in-house perspective, it's getting tougher. The recruitment industry has fragmented massively. The UK recruitment industry is the most fragmented recruitment market in the world. 18,000 recruitment companies, average headcount of about 5.5. So obviously you've got some big players, but 90% of people in recruitment work for very small firms. And often they have, you know, that kind of niche expertise that you can be trying to find. So it's more difficult than ever to try and get hold of them. Increasing compliance requirements, you know, within the whole hiring process, that kind of visibility of the whole supply chain is more critical than ever before. There are any number of examples I could talk about. Who knows about Locke versus British Gas? No? I mean, some nods, but you know, you will, which is, you know, one of the kind of latest rulings from I think the European Court, or supported by an employment tribunal, that basically says if you get commission as part of your pay and you go on holiday, you're entitled to continue to get commission. Now, for now for recruiters, that's a real issue in terms of, you know, the pressure it puts on their margins, for temps that they have. So that kind of compliance with just that one particular bit of case law is going to be very complicated. And as I say, that's one example of a number that I could give. And then, you know, continuing pressure on fill rates and cost per hire and time to hire. You know, try going back to, you know, your HR director or CEO and saying, look, it's tough out there. you know, you're going to get pretty short shrift. You know, the pressures continue to rise. And then as if that wasn't bad enough, you know, as well as kind of delivering all of this, they want greater market insight. You know, I don't just want to know the fill rate or the time to hire. I want to know the trends. I want to know what's around the corner. You know, whilst the market gets hotter, as I say, I think for the in-house community, it gets you know, considerably more challenging. That last point about the insight, that was something that kind of anecdotally, as we speak to a lot of people in the in-house community, you know, they were telling us. It was, I found this the other week, and again, it was the rec data. They do the regular job update, and they also ask employers their priorities, selection priorities when engaging recruiters. And you know, if you look in the last sort of couple of years, there's been very little change in terms of, you know, their expectations around service quality, very little change around price. But look at this thing here, you know, kind of management information, you know, very significant uplift in the demand and requirement for increased management information and increased market insight. Which kind of brings me on, hopefully quite neatly, to crowdsourcing. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first read these words, you know, an open call to a large group, I mean, kind of grammatically, I understood what it meant, but kind of practically, I didn't really kind of get it. And, you know, crowdsourcing is something that I'll show in a second, you know, we use, you know, quite regularly. It's not appropriate for everything. You know, you need certain conditions for crowdsourcing to kind of operate effectively. And they are, you need lots of buyers and lots of sellers, okay? You need kind of inefficient transactions, and you know, you need a market where there's a kind of lack of transparency makes costs difficult to control. If you think sort of pre-internet days, buying a car, it used to terrify me because I just always thought I was getting ripped off, you know? But lots of people buy a car, you know, and lots of people sell cars, but still, that kind of, the transactions were inefficient, lack of transparency makes you know, cost difficult to control. You know, these days, you go on Auto Trader or eBay or whatever, and you can compare the car you want to buy, and you go to the dealer, and you already know roughly what that should cost. So those are the sorts of conditions that you need for crowdsourcing. And then the sort of principles of providing, you know, to deliver a crowdsourcing offering, you know, you've got to provide maximum access and visibility. You've got to have some kind of specialist knowledge. You know, using the crowdsourcing platform, you've got to know something more than you did before you engaged with it. And of course, the whole idea around increasing speed and delivery is really important. So crowdsourcing works. You know, you use most, if not all of these already. You don't think about, you don't think of it as crowdsourcing. You just think of it as using Twitter or eBay or Rightmove or Amazon or whatever. You know, it's the power of lots of buyers, lots of sellers, and bringing them together. The Rightmove one is interesting, and in many ways analogous to the recruitment market. I mean, recruiters have been compared, you know, not unreasonably to estate agents over the years. You know, you've got buyers, disparate sellers, and, you know, and lots of kind of inefficient transactions in between. And so until relatively recently, there hasn't been a sort of crowdsourcing recruitment offering. And yet, you know, in the UK, the estate agency market is about £5 billion. The recruitment market is 30 billion. You know, that's before you start thinking about it as a global market where it's, you know, whatever it is, it's a couple hundred billion. So, you know, it seemed kind of odd to us at the job post that, you know, this huge market, which was crying out for some kind of offering, didn't have you know, an effective crowdsourcing platform, and that's what we kind of have set out to deliver. So our, you know, very strong view is, you know, crowdsourcing in some form or another is coming to the recruitment sector. It's just too big and even now, you know, too inefficient for it not to have some degree of impact. So brings me on to the job post. You know, we think there are some best practices. You know, if you're going to do this, there are some things that you really need to have work effectively in order to deliver an effective service to the two kind of primary constituencies. And, you know, the first thing, which is absolutely key, is it has to work for employers and recruiters. You know, an offering that just pisses off one group or the other, it might kind of work in the short term, but it doesn't have, a kind of long-term future. So it has to be a model that works for, both the employers and the recruiters. And for the employers, that means that they need access to the whole supply chain. There are 18,000 recruitment companies in the UK, some 60-odd thousand actual recruiters. And yet, if you add up your kind of PSLs, you're probably talking about a couple hundred people that you're kind of accessing, or using to access the market. So that sort of notion of accessing the whole recruitment market. And we'll talk about how you control that, because it's not about taking a drink from a fire hose, it's doing it in a controlled way. But equally for recruiters, they need an effective economic model. It's got to work for them as well. And the second point is it's about facilitation rather than management. It's kind of like those companies that try and ban office romances. I mean, it's just not, it's not going to happen. If people want to engage, you've got to find a way to sort of let them do it. And to sort of do it effectively. And for us, what that means is kind of letting the recruiter know who the employer is. This kind of idea of trying to fill a job behind a curtain just is a bit of a non-starter. Bit obvious, the market that you all have to look at is a mixture of contract and permanent. And if you talk to a lot of the biggest recruiting firms globally, they will tell you that in kind of 5, 10, 20 years, this differentiation will disappear. People won't think about themselves as permanent or contract employees. They'll just think about the opportunity that's in front of them. You already see that in a number of industry sectors already. So yeah, you've got to have an offering that covers both, and you've got to deliver market insight. It's what you need as an in-house community. It's what crowdsourcing really ought to be able to deliver. That whole notion of helping you understand what's going on in the market in which you're operating. And the great thing about reaching out to a crowd is you can get some really powerful feedback. A lot of the data that you'll look at in your own systems is by definition backward-looking. It's historical. Putting something, and we've seen so many examples of this with the job post, where we'll kind of post a job, we'll send it to a relevant community of, 100 recruiters. And some of them will say, actually, we'd quite like to engage on this. Others will say, we don't. And they tell us why. And it's, you might think, well, they're going to say the fee's not big enough. But actually, that's really the issue. It might be, we had an example where they said, actually, this is a contract job. It's not a permanent job. We had one where they said, actually, fee's all right. The payment terms are a killer, and we really don't like those. So when we advised the employer about how they can get better engagement, it wasn't about putting the fee up. It was actually about reducing your payment terms from 90 days to 30 days. We had one where we had 5 people come back and say, interesting job, interesting company, you're never going to get anyone to work for that line manager. And if one person tells you something, that's an opinion. If 100 people tell you something, that's kind of market insight and useful, useful information. So those are the kind of best practices, we think. And then in terms of how that is applied in the job post world, it's very simple. We have one contract. You as an employer determine the contract that you want to take to the market. If the recruiter doesn't like it, they don't engage. But if they do engage, you have instant compliance to whatever terms you choose to set. And you've got control over the fee that you want to pay. And this isn't about driving costs down. It is about cost optimization, where you can stop kind of rogue hiring managers going out and cutting deals with their mates at 35%. You can still allow them to operate with their preferred agencies, but they do this through a contract that you provide that gives you instant compliance, which again goes back to the point I made earlier about the importance of compliance and the regulatory side. And you do it in a controlled way. It's not a free-for-all. We have a model which is different to any other crowdsourcing recruitment platform, where the recruiter pays to engage. And it may only be a few £100s to get a fee of £8,000 or £10,000. But that is a fantastically effective way of screening out recruiters that don't really understand the job, who would just normally take a bit of a punt and fire in a CV, who are too busy. You know, I mean, if they're really busy, they're not going to have time to. You don't want a recruiter who may have, you know, the best knowledge of your market, but if she's got a full order book and doesn't have time to work on your job, that recruiter's no good to you. So it's a really effective way of screening in those recruiters who've got the knowledge and the capability and the motivation to work on, you know, work on your job. And then the kind of technical side around the kind of integration into ATSs and stuff like that. I mean, you'd kind of expect that in this day and age. So that's the sort of, you know, the model. I mean, this is what it looks like in practice. It's very straightforward. A recruiter sees the company, they see the role and the sort of key aspects of it. They see the fee that they get if they fill the job, and then they see how much it costs to engage. And we only allow at any one time 2 recruiters, so they're not in a massive free-for-all either. It's the first 2 recruiters that buy the job that then engage with the employer. So that's the sort of a run-through of a model that we spent 2 hours yesterday talking to someone about. So that's a real kind of skip through it. But it works, and it really works for, you know, some of the most difficult roles that you can imagine. My personal favorite, which isn't up here, is a head seamstress. You know, someone came in, we need a head seamstress. I mean, this one here, the payroll manager, might sound like a straightforward role. It was in a local council, I think in Hull. You know, the job had been open for 3 months, and, you know, we found a specialist agency who filled it in 4 days. So, you know, for those really challenging roles, it's an enormously effective way of opening up to the whole market. But it also works for major accounts, and one of our biggest supporters is Nestle. We've been working with them for sort of 9 months or so. And, you know, this is kind of live data, I mean, across a range of different Nestle brands, across a range of different Nestle locations. We get great engagement from agencies because, you know, they're very happy to work with a brand like Nestle. And often these are smaller, I mean, we work with some of the bigger agencies, often we work with smaller niche agencies who would never get, you know, within a mile of Nestle. It would be like someone kind of knocking on a castle, you know, wall and just getting, you know, a pot of oil chucked over them. They just don't get near Nestle through the normal process. But we're able to get them to, you know, allow them to engage with the firm. And our current placement rate is running at 70%. The last 10 jobs we've had, we've filled 7. So these are jobs that they've tried to fill directly. They've gone to their kind of tier 1, and then they've come to us, and they're getting a 70% hit rate. So it works for, you know, SMEs and difficult roles, but it also works for a lot of the bigger kind of corporate, kind of enterprise size employers too. And, you know, the MI that we're able to deliver is, you know, both historical and also, you know, kind of real time in terms of our window into the market. So that ability to, you know, give real time data around, you know, any number of criteria and you know, the employer kind of determines what they need to know, and we're able to deliver that. There are some other people that do it, but we don't talk about them. Just, you know, in the spirit of objectivity and balance, I thought I'd very briefly mention them. So I think, you know, the trends that we see, the industry generally will continue to polarize. You know, the big will get bigger, you know, the niche will get more specialist. You know, the run faster model of recruiter, you know, those recruitment companies whose only offering is to hustle better than the next guy, they have an increasingly short lifespan, and I think deservedly so. They're not really offering added value, and they're not ultimately going to outrun technology. So that model will, I think, you know, continue to kind of disappear. You know, direct hiring is clearly going to continue to evolve. It's you know, the downturn that we're now properly out of, but it was a long time before we came out of it, and what that did was allow a lot of new direct hiring models to get properly embedded. So that is now, you know, very well established and will continue to evolve. But you are likely to see indirect hiring, and, you know, the statistic earlier on, I think, would suggest that that's, you know, that is the case. And then turning, you know, metrics into, you know, market intelligence. And, you know, ultimately, you know, we're pretty sure that in some form or another that crowdsourcing will disrupt the industry. So what we wanted to do is to sort of wrap up with a kind of challenge the job post, and we've put one of these on your seats, and there's plenty outside, and we'd love you to kind of, before you get to my situation where the job is kind of career, threatening, back with my compliance role, if you've got something that is a bit of a headache that we could possibly help you with, we'd love to see what we could do. It's free to employers anyway to do that. But just in case the commercial arguments haven't swayed you, we've got a very large bottle of Dom Perignon that's sitting outside there. So anyone that does post a job with us will draw the name from a hat in the next couple of days and send you the bottle of Dom Perignon. That's it. Thank you for your attention, and go and grab a well-deserved coffee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.